after the content. All right, and welcome to another episode. Another episode where we learn and share some nuggets regarding spatial experience. What is spatial experience? Why spatial experience? For whom spatial experience? And today I actually have a spatial experience slash special guest, Andrew, my friend, Andrew Schwartz. We go way back. I remember when we met in New York on a dinner, right? It was back then during the let's call it metaverse phase, right? And we had a really deep conversation. And yeah, thank you for taking the time, Andrew. Do you want to introduce yourself?
An absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Andrew Schwartz. I'm currently director of metaverse engineering inside of a shoe company called Nike. I've done a lot of things over the course of my career, though, and it's kind of brought me to here from being a director of digital strategy in the consulting world, director of brand strategy, new product director, to a midwife for startups, to running Fortune 5 innovation labs and building everything on the idea that the future is just out there. We need to find our way to it. And it's been a really fun ride, but I'm glad to be able to be here to talk with you today.
Well, you have always been an inspiration, one of those minds that when you chat about a future back perspective, I've always humbly learned. And you have a very reflective and a very nuanced approach. That's the reason why I was really excited to have this chat. And I said, well, these nuggets of wisdom, we should be sharing them also with others, because we are definitely in an inflection point when it comes from, on one hand, technology. And obviously we could, drill down on what all the updated technology and the latest technology, but ultimately it's all about the new generation, right? The Gen Z and Alpha. And you already started sharing, what you're working on, and there is a lot to unpack. Maybe for the audience here, Andrew, do you mind unpacking what does it mean? Your title is saying a leading / director of metaverse engineering at Nike. What does it actually mean? Why this role for such a relevant company?
Well, get back to the idea of what metaverse is. And first off, I got to say, I'm glad I've got color correction on my computer. You're making me blush. But I think if you think about what do we mean when we talk about metaverse, and it's a terrible word, and it brings up bad feelings because of what people thought it was supposed to be a few years back. But really, it's this idea of what you can feel and what you can touch, and it's also it's a spectrum. On the one hand, you've got like blockchain, crypto, identity. You've got on this overspace here where everything comes down to a number and a name. And that's where all the coins are. That's all crypto is. That's where all that and it's a lot of fun. You can make a lot of money, and a lot of people are making a lot of money. You can lose a lot of money too. On the other hand, you've got experience. You've got all of the extended reality stuff. You've got ways of being able to extrapolate what you're feeling through digital means. It's the fullest extent of that is video games. When the experience and the identity come together, you've got this space that has been called metaverse. It's where you can take physical products and add digital properties to them, or take digital products and add physical products to them. And the idea that I often explain this idea with is, and NFTs are a bad word, I know, but there's a really cool idea behind it. It's the idea that if you have a digital shoe, you can't do much with it. You can make a copy of it. But if you have a physical shoe, you can you can wear it, you can put it on the shelf, you can make a lamp out of it, you can do almost anything, but you can't make another one from it. If you have a way of putting that immutable identity from the physical side into the flexibility that you have with the digital side, you end up uncovering something that's brand new. And what we realize as you're thinking about how the world around us lives, especially as we start thinking about what AI does with all of this, if every object has an identity, there's specific information, specific data that's generated because of that. There's data everywhere around us, and data created all of the time. You create data based on the path you choose to walk. There's data based on the weather around you, the ambient noise around you, the number of people around you. All of that data, inclusive of the data you create, needs to be organized. And AI does a really nice job of organizing data into information and then presenting it back in a way that's useful to you. This means this layer of data that's all over everything around us can be turned into information that we can use for any means we can imagine. This is another dimension of our world, like time.
Wow.
And this idea of blurring physical and digital in the world around us is really where we sit when we're talking about how metaverse has evolved. If everything has an identity and data exists tied to that identity, using that data to create information that can be presented back to you in a way that's useful to you is where we're going to be living for the rest of our lives.
That is beautiful. You are bringing really fundamental pillars here to the table. Let's unpack a couple of things. So you went from there is a spectrum of this world, right? What once was is evolving, which, by the way, hasn't it always been like that, right? I remember the mid 2000, right? Or actually even earlier in my career, looking back, the end of the 90s, where application service providing became then software as a service, managed service providing, then platform as a service, and then all of a sudden in 2011, Steve Jobs decided, to rename it, cloud computing, and then this cloud computing era started. But we were already 15 years into it. Like all this to say that every new evolution, right, has a beginning, but the essence is, let's say, what makes the difference. So regardless if we call it metaverse, you're beautifully saying that there are three ingredients at the table, right? On one hand, you have identity and the ownership of that data, right? On the other hand, you said it's experience, right? And then you brought the last component into it, that is AI, right? So saying to the world of Web3 that it's just one component, it's almost like unfair and not really correct, right? And what are your thoughts?
I think it's really interesting as you look at the various hype cycles we've lived through over the last few years. Each one of them has offered this opportunity to grift, to get a lot of money out of it, and then after the hype goes away, the money goes away, and you're left just with this really interesting technology. It's the idea that in 2000, people had spent a lot of time and money getting ready for the Y2K bug, and all this money was out there, and all these people have been doing all this work. And then the .com world popped up. And 2000 into 2001, a lot of, if you had the era of irrational exuberance, if you had a .com in your name, you'd make money. And it came to a head with the Super Bowl that year, when Pets.com was really just selling dog food, but everybody thought it was special because they bought an ad to talk about how you could go online and order stuff. We do that every day now. But the dot bomb that happened after that, when the .com boom went bust, left behind not only a lot of debt and a lot of interesting companies with interesting names that didn't really do anything, but it left behind a lot of companies that knew what they were trying to figure out. And the strategies and the people who had good business ideas continued to move forward with those good business ideas and built the Web 2 world that we've been living in for the last 20 years.
Yeah.
That is where we are now. We're at an inflection point over the course of really kind of a rolling inflection point over the course of the last 3 or 4 years, where you've had an interesting technology hype itself up, then bust, and then leave behind something worthwhile. Look at what's happened with Ethereum. Look at what's happened with Bitcoin, with the way crypto is funding things. Look at the way identity is played out. I think it's called Aura, the digital passport in Europe. The idea of having a digital passport that aligns a digital identity to every product you buy, that provides insight into the provenance of that product, as well as insight into additional features that can come from that product, is a direct sibling of the NFTs that people were selling for far too much money back in the day. These are things that are going to continue moving forward. And as we push forward, we start integrating these concepts that are wild and new into the way that we live our everyday lives. It's called a revolution because it goes in a full circle.
Yeah.
And if you think about like what was high tech, at one point plumbing was high tech, but we don't think of it that way anymore.
Yes.
There are food products that still have the word electricity in them, or charged or in them, because at one point that's how they were made, and people were excited because there was some kind of electricity involved in the creation of the food product.
Yes.
So we're at a point now where all of these pieces have come together, and we're reorganizing into a way that makes more sense for how people live their lives, not make sense because people want to play with technology.
Yes, absolutely. So we are maturing. We are experimenting, maturing. You mentioned the word inflection points. That inflection points has a series of of experiments, right? That I always like to say as an entrepreneur, right, that we continuously learn with those ingredients that we have on the table, right? Imagine the two of us, and I'm famous for cooking. At least this is my passion and dedication, Andrew, right? We meet, right? We cook, and maybe the first bruschetta doesn't taste good, right?
Yep.
Maybe the second bruschetta or the third bruschetta. Like we are really maturing what we have on the table. And on one hand, we have inflection points from a technological perspective that is truly shaping the way that we are actually really living in the future, right? Living as a general term, as a roof topic, right? And beneath it, right, how we socialize, how we shop, right? And then on the other hand, you have in parallel also the evolution as an inflection point of we're serving a new generation. I mean, we're writing the year 2025, and now this year, the generation beta was born, right? Which right now are just hooping and drinking milk, right? But Gen Alpha and Gen Z, right? They're up and running, right? And so, what was one of the most recent things that you have learned as you are very much focused on not just technology for the sake of technology, but really, serving this next generation? What are one of the learnings that you have had most recently that maybe changed the way you're thinking about how to approach this generation versus the previous millennials generation? What are your thoughts, and what can you share with the audience?
Well, one of the things that keeps coming to mind is a book called Faster. And in Faster, the concept that they presented was that once you become used to something, you start getting annoyed by it. They talked about how microwaves created a way to make popcorn in 3 minutes, which was really exciting for anybody that used to take 10 to 15 minutes to make popcorn at home. But how many times when you're making popcorn, are you just sitting there waiting for it to be finished because you're annoyed it's taking too long? It is that the audience matures at the same rate that their desires mature. And that's a really important thing to think about. We've been going through a steady series of maturations, of flattening that's been occurring. You mentioned before, the cloud computing. The idea of flattening, there's and I'm going to get to the Gen Alpha thing in a moment, but there's a series of animations that show you what a typical corporate desk looks like from the 1950s to 2025. And over the course of this animation, you see multiple products being merged together. In the 1950s, there's a check writing machine, there's a calculating machine, there's a Rolodex, there's a telephone, there's a number of different pads, a calendar. And as you go forward, suddenly the check writing machine goes away, and suddenly the calendar goes away, and suddenly the Rolodex, and everything ends up collapsing into a computer. But then everything then ends up collapsing into a phone, and you've got a blank desk with just an iPhone sitting on it. The way for things to flatten is a part of what we're looking at now. But when you go to the audience, everything has to be focused on the audience, because those are the people that actually care about what you do, and they are the end users of your things. You've got a position now where we don't live in a macro culture. We live in a series of microcultures. We don't have a mass market anymore. There's more than just 3 television channels to watch. There are a million different things to take people's attention all the time. We have a series of microcultures. The algorithm that people talk about with TikTok is a great example of this. If you're scrolling through TikTok and you find a cat video, but you happen to fall asleep, and you see the cat video and you watch it many, many, many times, your timeline is going to be entirely filled with cat videos until you start moving off to something else. Microcultures will start popping up so that it can be as simple as one idea, and it can be as small as one person, and these things get siloed. But you have mass cultural events like the Super Bowl, where people from all different microcultures get together to watch a thing. Maybe because they want to see Kendrick Lamar. Maybe because they want to make fun of Drake. Maybe because they want to watch whether Taylor Swift is going to win the Super Bowl this year because she needs another ring. But all of these people are coming together based on their microcultures in their silos in one place to be able to catch things. It means that people aren't looking at broadcast television anymore. People aren't looking at placement of ads. They're looking to integrate. And more importantly, as we go further, this idea of being authentic to you becomes really important. Authenticity is a huge component of the way we live our world now. You're going to want to find things that actually matter to you. You're going to gravitate towards things that you want to align yourself with, because we don't want to be we don't want to look at billboards anymore. We want to be the billboard. We want other people to recognize what we're doing and have these kind of discrete ways of being able to learn about new products, or these discrete ways of being able to learn about new services. Look at the way the creator economy has come around on TikTok, on Instagram. It is this idea of somebody who has made themselves up to be attractive, who had made themselves up to be confident, looking at you in the camera and saying, Tommaso, this is what I want you to know. This is important for you to know. And I care about this, but I care about you knowing about this. So here's my product. And if you look at the way that people are selling inside those things, it's very one-to-one, but without the cold calling, terror or the fear of knocking on the door. People want authenticity. People are going to strive for it. And as we get into this new world, the expectation will be that I'm not talking to a room full of 30 people, that I'm talking to you. And 30 people might be listening, or 300,000 people might be listening. But if the conversation we have is interesting to the both of us, it's going to bleed out and be interesting to them, and they're going to want to be a part of it as well. That's where I think the key shift is occurring.
Okay, so on one hand, there is this understanding of the innovation is a continuous evolution. You mentioned the book here. I actually brought it, right? Faster, did you say, right? The book Faster, yeah. Right? And that basically is describing how what today is available becomes all of a sudden again annoying. So it's an evolution, all right. So whenever you have, like, innovation is either too early or too late, right? This famous thing, right? And either people don't know about the cars while you are riding a horse, right? And then all of a sudden they see the car and now they want faster cars. That's an evolution, right? And at the same time, the shift that you're seeing in Gen Z and Gen Alpha is into micro communities, right? It's all about really the small groups, which is a tremendous shift from millennials, right? The last 25 years, we have built this thing called, the mobile phones that were supporting this social networks that were leading towards vanity, one to many, right? And collecting likes, right? And that was the KPI and measurement, right? And now, as you were saying, it's, hey, Andrew, right? So now it's about you. Right, and the technology that supports that circumstance and that moment, that makes it feel like it's you, right? They're talking to actually you, right? That's the conversion that we see there, right? You mentioned something in the previous actually in the original question that we had at the beginning regarding the description of the evolution of the metaverse, where it's going, right? And then you said it's about feeling, right? I think that one of my most recent articles is Web 1 read write, and we know that there is the Dixon book, right, from A16Z, which is read write owned, right? And so I was also for a very long time really believing that ownership is still a fundamental, really important, right, a benefit and therefore a need for the next gen. But most recently I've truly matured as a product in beta, right, into my belief, which is it's actually read write feel.
I like that idea.
Right?
I like that idea. Yeah, it's interesting when you talk about feel, because for a very long time, product developers were told to focus on empathy. And how can you bring empathy into the product design? It's not just how do I make a light switch, it's how do I make a light switch that you'll want to use, or how do I make a water bottle that you'd want to use? How do I make a software product that you'd want to use? How can you empathize with the problem that somebody's having? Because when you start feeling what the person is having, the problem the person is having, you start finding ways to solve it in a way that's more than just cold-hearted. It's just literally something that is based on the idea of this is why this problem exists, and this is how my solution will address it. Feeling is important. The experience is important. People bring their whole selves to the things that they do, and the things that they enjoy and they love, the things that they align to and focus on, they can't stop thinking about, are the kind of products you want to find a way to create, because you're going to make the life better for someone. Read, write, feel is a really interesting concept, because it elevates the idea of experience across the board, and not experience because of the way that it looks, not experience because of the way that it clicks, not experience in the way of like designing user interfaces, but experience is in not only what you bring to the table, but also what you're able to get from the thing. There's another book called The Experience Machine that talks about how our brains are wired to
Experience machine.
our brains are wired to anticipate experiences, and that because of that anticipation of experiences, we are creating the world we live in as we're experiencing it, and we are shaping the reality that we own. And that idea plays into the feeling part of this, in that if you understand who you're building for and you understand what they're looking to get, you can meet their needs better, simply because you're satisfying questions that they don't even know they're asking.
Building the world. So we're moving now from what once was a traditional application you could swipe through, a two-dimensional world one, right? Now towards the word we are using as a world, right? And in that world, you have most probably a multi-sensorial experience, right? Really, what you see, what you touch, eventually what you smell, right? And what you taste, right? And that makes you as an end user feel. It connects you then, right? That is basically through the experience, right? I have a connection and empathy towards that circumstance, right? That becomes then the experience, right?
Yeah, it's interesting when you think about how generative AI plays into this as well.
Yes.
Because and I was watching earlier today a video of a gentleman who was having a conversation with an AI voice avatar agent called Maya from Sesame. And the conversation was as if two people were talking, and not just because there was a vocal inflection, but because of the additional insights and inputs that the AI was adding to it, that would be the general kind of asides or just like under your breath comments that people have throughout conversations all the time. You and I are having a far more formal conversation here than we normally do when we're just sitting and chatting. And in the way that you're able to bring in little tiny like in jokes or things was happening from the AI side. And it was the AI doing this to align with the expectation that the user, the guy in the hat, had when he was talking to her. That idea of being able to filter your presentation through an understanding of your audience's desires, needs, and best way to receive information is where we're starting to get to with AI right now. If you look at what the promise of Apple Intelligence is, it's not just hey, show me the podcast Tommaso was doing last week, and then taking me the Apple podcast and then bringing it up or giving me the opportunity to pull it up. It would actually be playing it, or not telling me like when does my sister get into town and then taking me to Expedia. It would be just showing me the information. If we think of an appless world where information is provided to us based on just what we need, when we need it, when we ask for it, we're creating a kind of corpus of information based around my preferences for how I like to know what's happening around me. And that information, that becomes a filter for me, an API effectively for how I like information brought to me. And as we get into that, this idea of what's authentic to how I like to find information, how do I view authenticity in the world, how do I gather information about the world around me, and how do I experience the world around me, it will come from this kind of self-created filter that's being applied by AI to turn the data around me into information that I can use in methods and ways that matter to me. I might find more information coming from somebody talking to me about something than I do reading, or I might find it better to see a cartoon rather than listening to something. All of that plays into the world we're getting into. All of that plays towards the world we're getting into, rather, and all of it plays to the idea that my point of view for me will provide me with the best way to learn about the space I'm living in. And for product folks, for people who are building those connections to us, having a better way of being able to present information that I can then represent to me based on my filter is going to be really important.
So micro groups is the way that we are paying attention today. So the attention grabber, right? And in order to have that attention grabber, you have the intelligence that knows enough and understands and reasons, right? So that it becomes the famous filter, right? So that it interprets, reasons with you, and now you start paying attention, right? Now, take us all the way into time and space, right? So we are moving from a large language model that obviously over the last year and a half, 2 years have been top of mind for anyone really transforming the way that we do anything. I like to say we are democratizing intelligence. Okay, now here is humanity that has, everyone is intelligent, all right? So now what is it we do as human being, right? And we are now slowly maturing into this next dimension of intelligence, where the input side and the output side of things is space, literally the large world model. We're seeing, Cosmos, NVIDIA, we see other startups raising tons of money, and obviously, in full disclaimer, right, and Phygtl, we are working on in the similar sector of large world model, which we apply specifically for Gen Z and Alpha to create and democratize experiences. Now, how is space all of a sudden again important? Meaning the physical world that becomes more intelligent, more bespoke, and all the ingredients that you mentioned. What can you share with us there, Andrew?
There is nothing more intimate than where you actually are sitting. You can put on a Vision Pro, you can see the world, you can visit Paris or Rome or Caracas or do anything, but you're still sitting the one place you actually are. You can't fake where you physically are. And that means on a passive basis, while I'm sitting at this desk, by the way, this is a fake video. I'm not sitting in front of an actual mirror or window. I got a green screen behind me. You can fake.
I love your curtains.
Thank you. You can fake a lot of things, but you are still sitting in the chair you're sitting in. Now, think about how that plays out in the world around you. There's a phrase, there's an idea that I really like, which is passive contextual prompting. Because we think about prompts with AI all the time. But how do you passively create a prompt based on the context of what you're doing and where you are? And how can that generate a response that then comes back to you in a way that is important for what you're trying to do? And it could be like, I'm going on a run and I want to have a steady podcast created on the space around me. Or I want to have a playlist that starts and stops based on the traffic lights that are around me, so that it knows ahead of time, because of my pace, my path, and the timing of the traffic signals. It will know so that I can plan around it. I like the idea of going into a world that's fully alive with information because of the filter that I've placed on it and the objectives I want to achieve, or the things I want to do. So as I look deep into the future, space is an important piece of this, because physically where you are provides you with everything that, as a human, you are able to gather. It is the way of being able to understand the space that you're in. Obviously, I'm self-referential there, but I apologize. It's because you're in a location that you can experience the things around that location. But it's the layer of data in this dimension that's on top of us that provides additional insight for greater experiences within that location. And that's where I think all of these things start stacking up, from extended reality to the identity that comes from blockchain stuff, to the value that comes from activity, to the way that you're engaging in the world around you, to the insight of information in the space around you, to the way that you interact with other people, to the way that you're presenting yourself out to the rest of the world. All of these things stack together to create what we will become. And hopefully it's something that's more fun and enlightening and brings people together, even though we'll have this filter around us. At one point, you'd have to stop. If you were driving a car at one point, every time you got to an intersection, you had to stop, honk your horn before you could move forward, because there was a distinct fear of people being hit by cars, even though they're only going 15 miles an hour. We're now able to manage that because we have stop signs, we have right-of-ways, we have other laws and things in place. We're getting to the point of understanding the maturation around it, but we are at a point now where the future is just starting to peek over the horizon.
Yep, beautiful. No, thanks for sharing this. And the current experience slash the usability experience in browser based and desktop based and mobile based has been swiping through things, right, that could be eventually three-dimensional. Most of them are still two-dimensional, and they could only provide a certain level of emotions, right? It's more informative, right? It's things that maybe once you read through it, that makes then sense, and you start processing. Now we are, with the technologies that you have mentioned, right? We are creating this filter, and now the filter starts talking to you. It starts understanding you, and now it gets even actually beyond the screens and beyond the browser, and becomes screenless. And actually with that, we are going to have a surrounding and a world that is bespoke to us, right? So Andrew, the future of looking around and say, why is this corner right here equally for me than it is for the next one that is looking at it, and then you wear them again and say, no, I want to have, my environment, my bespokeness, my most recent activities, right? And that beautifies and makes your life ultimately more pleasant, right? An enhanced way of living things, right?
Completely, absolutely. You're able to live in a world with greater insight and context because of the being able to tap into that layer of data that lives all around us.
Right on. Last question. I know this chat could go forever. I always enjoy it, right? But take the audience here to something like, to not too far into the future, but maybe let's say 2030. It's tangible, in a couple of years, right? What's a day in a life of a Gen Alpha, which by then will be around, between most probably 18, 20, 22. What's your vision there? Take us all the way 5 years down the road.
It's fun to think about how that plays out with the digital natives. I remember there were babies who had so much experience using iPads that when they got to a television or a magazine, they tried to swipe the image to make it bigger. I think the use of voice guiding and people in your ear is going to go away, and I think it's going to be more subtle. But I think that for the life of people 20 years from now who are 20 years old, they're going to have a world where they're able to change how everything around them looks and change how they appear to everyone else. They're going to have ways of being able, in the same way that we use permissions in social media now, between there are people that you are close friends with. There's people you're close friends with who can see all of your information plus special stuff. There are people that you're mutuals with. There are people that you follow, people who follow you, people you don't know, and people you don't want to know, the people you block. Each one of those layers, I think, will create the opportunity for Gen Alpha to be able to present themselves to the world so they can have a curated persona for each of the environments they get into. I think they're going to be able to have more help. They're going to be able to do more creative things because they'll have more backing behind it. One of the detractions you hear about AI is that it's easier to direct than to compose. And I think that's because it's easier to have hey, Midjourney, give me a picture of this, and I can have a picture of that made, and then I can adjust it. I think it's going to allow us to provide, I think we're going to get to the point of being able to create more hands-on things rather than relying on the creation level to come from something else. I think that the integration of assistance is going to go beyond just answering questions, providing insight and information of AI as in the smart person in your ear, but I think it's going to merge into medical. I think it's going to merge into physical examples of that, where you're going to have other ways of being able to have artificial strength, artificial muscles, artificial endurance that will come from these various aspects. I think you're going to see a greater combination of technology and human than we've ever experienced to date. And that's exciting, but I think we got to make sure that what makes human sticks around. And at the end of the day, it's a smile from a friend, or it's a way of being able to find the person you love, or to have the family that loves you, or to do your spot every day to make the world a little bit better. And that is, I think, where we're going to end up. Technology will start to disappear, not because it's going away, but because we won't be focused on it.
Yes, it's utility, right? That's exactly the direction it's going. Beautiful. Best way to wrap up things. So it's all about ultimately it's all about how technology makes us feel, right? That serves us, right? And creates an enhanced way for us to feel. Thanks so much for sharing your wisdom and nuggets here. I wrote down the 2 books, Faster and Experience Machine. How can the audience listen or know more about you? I know that you're writing things. You have a blog post or a Twitter that you're pretty active on. What can you tell the audience?
Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. That's the best way to find me, and we can go all kinds of places from there.
Right on. Andrew, give it up for Andrew. Thank you so much. And I'll see you, I guess, in this new dimension, Andrew, right?
Absolutely.